It's too big, and enough is enough.
Opponents of a convention center hotel in Miami Beach say it's too big and a bad deal for the city and its residents.
But this is a 99-year lease. It's a long-term project with decades of benefit to the city.
Supporters insist South Florida needs it to stay competitive in the convention business industry.
In Florida, they hate little Marco Rubio so much, he couldn't be elected dog catcher.
The insults fly as GOP candidates get down and dirty. Will it attract or turn off voters? We will take it to the roundtable.
And elevate the conversation as well. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So great to have you aboard today.
And I am glad you are back on board after your various assignments. The presidential race, we know, is on your mind and on ours as well. We'll get to it. But first, an important question on the primary ballot on Miami Beach.
And it's a question of development versus quality of life, and that should resonate all the way from Coral Springs to Key West. Should the city of Miami Beach lease a parking lot to a developer to build a 28-story hotel there right next to the convention center?
Portland Holdings of Atlanta wants to build it with $400 million of its own money. The city would collect about $2.5 million in rent in the early years, more down the road, and it's a very long road, 99 years. Kristen Rosen-Gonzalez is a Miami Beach City Commissioner. She is against the hotel. She says it's too big, out of scale, and a bad deal.
Dan Gelber is a longtime resident of Miami Beach who has also represented the city in the State House and in the Senate. He is a lawyer in private practice. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Great to have you both come in. Let's begin with the pro side, and Dan Gelber, what's the best reason to build a hotel this big on that site next to the convention center?
Well, Miami has struggled with its current convention center for decades. And the problem is it attracts these trade shows. So every day when there's a trade show there, and it's just a glorified bazaar, 6,000 cars come into our city. If you can change the configuration of that convention center so it attracts conferences, trade, not just trade shows, but real conventions at 4 or 5 days where people are driving back and forth, you can reduce the traffic 2,000 or 3,000. And if you look at this project, what it's also going to do, because you need a convention center hotel next to it for it to really work, it's going to create a huge 5 or 6 acre park where that ugly parking lot is right now. So it's
right
really
on the west side of the convention center.
So it's going to be, it's the best project we could hope for. And by the way, I'm not getting paid by anybody. I'm just here because I'm interested in this, and I can't stand the outright lies that are going on about this thing, including the stuff you're getting in the phones through robocalls.
Yeah,
and
we'll get to that presently.
And you brought up traffic right off the bat, and I know, Commissioner Gonzalez, traffic is at the very top of the con list, in the list of pros and cons. Explain why traffic, despite what Dan Gelber was talking about, that it might reduce traffic, describe why that is the top of the opposition right now.
Well, I think people are having a hard time getting around the city. The other day in front of the commission chambers, I heard a doctor say that it took him 40 minutes to go 6 blocks to get to Mount Sinai to perform an emergency procedure. So we're in an emergency situation right now, and the data and the traffic study commissioned for this project is flawed. As you can see, Alton Road and 17th Street, already it's a failed intersection. And the traffic study is assuming that every guest that comes to the hotel is only going to take 1 trip. And we know that people come and they will stay at the hotel and they will walk around, but they're also going to travel to Ocean Drive. They might go to Bal Harbor, visit Wynwood. So it doesn't take into account Uber, Lyft, the fact that people aren't only going to stay at the hotel, and also the fact that we have consumer trade shows, and that's part of what defines Miami Beach, and I'm sure we're not going to give them
the auto show, the jewelry show, the boat show, and Art Basel. Well, as a matter of fact, Dan Gelber, let me bring that up. For 13 years, Art Basel has been at the Miami Beach Convention Center, thanks to Norman Brayman, a lot of other wonderful people in the community. Mr. Brayman, among others, says, oh, now it may leave without a convention center hotel. But Art Basel has been there for 13 successful years without a hotel. So, I mean, how real is this?
Well, I think and by the way, the reason why Norman Brayman supports this project is that I think he and, like I, believe that it's a smart project. There's no use of city money for the hotel at all, which is something that folks against it have been saying, and it's just untrue. But the reason why it makes a lot of sense, and I want to address the commissioner's point about traffic. There's only been 1 traffic study. traffic study said exactly what you would think common sense would tell you, which is when you have a show that is that only attracts local people, like a one of those furniture shows that are there, home expos or something, you're going to get, and it's true, we get 6,000 people making these trips back and forth, 6,000 cars by car. And when you have a convention or a conference, and we know that all these Oracle, all these other tech conferences want to come here, but they won't because we don't have this hotel, you will have people coming in for 3 or 4 days. You might have an Uber trip or two, but what you're not going to have are people coming in and leaving every single day, not spending a dime here, not spending a night here, just using our roads. And so this traffic study, which is not flawed, it's the only study that's been done, says that you're going to reduce the number of cars substantially when you change the character of the convention center, which, by the way, right now, 90% of what's in that convention center are trade shows. They're not conferences.
Yeah, there were 55, I believe, trade shows, consumer shows in the last year or so, and 5 big conventions. And I'm told that the plan is to simply reverse that. They have 25 or 30 conventions and maybe 20, 25 trade shows.
Can I just ask a sort of, it's going to sound like a contrarian question, and I don't mean it to be this way, but
you can be contrarian.
The Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau, Bill Talbert, who is very much supportive of this project, puts out a weekly newsletter that I read faithfully, and he's always touting the astronomical numbers, a 90% occupancy rate on the beach, and people coming in, and the percentages are going up. Why do we need convention business on Miami Beach?
Well, by the way, the problem we have right now is that we have a convention center does attract things. There's no question about that. But we have this huge monolith in the middle of our city that attracts the worst kind of shows. So we're not going to get rid of the whole thing. What they want to do is make it something that's thoughtful. And the reason why this deal is so good, and let's deal with what I think the 2 things that people want to know about, traffic and cost. Let's deal with cost. This is the hotel is a 2-acre site, and it's a $400 million project, and not 1 penny is coming from the city. This is not a city-supported hotel. It's not subsidized. And by the way, I mean, I've gotten in the mail now in robocalls, a new $1 million hotel we don't need costing $400 million of taxpayer dollars.
Yeah,
Kristen knows that's not true.
And she's not responsible for it.
I know
either.
she's not.
Can I answer some of these questions? First of all, you're assuming that Miami Beach is paying no subsidy, but we're giving, this is a land grab, kind of, for taxpayer dollars. If you think about this, at the end of the day, we're giving Portman this site. And this, we're giving, and in 2013, he was getting this site at a cost of $138,000 per hotel room. Now we're giving it to him at $95,000.
But that was a much bigger project.
Much different deal.
That was a different
deal.
That
had retail. It was the city was giving away 50 acres of land at that time, and now they're giving 2 acres. And by the way, let's be very clear, because look, you're an elected commissioner. People hope that you're going to do the research and be direct with them. Nobody can say that a new hotel we don't need costing $400 million in tax. That's just a lie.
Okay, this might be a good point for me to just tell everybody that we did invite commissioners who were very supportive of this, and not one agreed to come in.
Well, I think, look, this has become a really sort of ugly fight. And I'm not going to get ugly, but I am going to, and you have a right to your opinion. And your
why
opinion,
are you assuming that that's me? Why are you?
No, I'm not. But by the way,
to do with that.
Kristen,
I'm advocating for the people. I think I represent a silent majority right now, and we're very frustrated. We can't get around the city. And I think Glenna's right in terms of the fact that we don't necessarily want to be defined by a major convention center city. We're not Orlando, we're not Des Moines, we're not Houston, and these are all the places that Bill Talbert keeps referring to. Dan,
now,
why is this such a great deal? It's a huge tower.
Listen, Kristen, first of all, I'm not saying this is you.
It's not a great deal.
But what I am saying is that, by the way, some outside group is telling the citizens of the city that it's going to cost them $400 million. And you, as a commissioner, know that's not true. And I'm not saying you did this, but you ought to at least have the courage to say to people, no, that happens to not be true. That's not something you should be agreeing. Do you agree?
Do you know what it's going to cost us? It's going to cost us our quality of life, Dan Gilbert.
Okay, well, let's talk about that.
It's going to cost us our ability to get around an 800-room tower on 17th Street, which has already failed. It's way too narrow. We could definitely do this in a smaller scale.
Kristen, the only traffic study, and by the way, to be very clear, I voted for you. And when you were running, by the way, you said you were for this. Okay, and that deal was done. It was in December. You posted on your Facebook page. You liked it. And now someone has whispered in your ear and you've changed your mind. And let me
nobody whispered in my ear. I became educated because I didn't understand all of the numbers involved with this project. I didn't understand how out of scale this tower was.
Can I frame this question? Frame this question this way. What does Miami Beach and its residents get out of this? what is the benefit? And as someone who opposes this project, can you speak to what are benefits?
Well, I think 10 to 20 years down the road, we're going to begin to see significant financial benefits from this. But for the next 10 years, while we have no mass transit, the first time we're going to see any revenue at all, I think, is 2022. And that will be about $3 million, and that will be divided over education and some other benefits. But the majority of these tax dollars have to be spent on capital improvements projects or tourism. So while tourism and the convention center and Lincoln Road District will benefit from this, our residents and the people who live in North Beach and South Beach, we're really not going to benefit all that much.
All right, well, could I just, excuse me, Dan, just a minute. I think we should point out that the lease deal, and again, the question on the ballot is not do you want the hotel, whether the city should lease 2.5 acres of land where the hotel will be built.
Kristen, you just went for lunch. Let me respond to this.
Okay, let me tell you, we need to go to a commercial right now.
Okay, all right.
And we're going to do that, and we're going to pick up exactly where we left off in 2 minutes or so. So stay with us.
Okay.
Bye.
Well, while you were away, the debate went on between Commissioner Kristen Rosen-Gonzalez, Miami Beach Commissioner Dan Gelber, former state senator, former House member. We should point out that the deal between the city of Miami and Portman Holdings calls for the city to get $74 million over 99 years. And maybe, Dan Gelber, that is why on the Vote Yes brochures, it says here, the average payment to the city would be $24.6 million in lease and tax payments. But in fact, that's an average over 99 years. There's no guarantee.
Let me go over, let's go over the finances.
It's going to be 24.6
It's very fair.
million.
It's a fair question. Let's go over the finances. Let's understand this is a small 2-acre parking lot that right now gives the city of Miami Beach $300,000 a year. Now we're going to lease it to Portman, which is an architect and developer, very reputable, very good person, and done a very good job at other places. He's a good guy. And there's no gambling in the facility. He's already agreed to that and didn't want it. So the next thing that happens is we're giving up this parking lot that right now generates $300,000, and we're leasing to him this same little spot that really serves only the purpose of cars right now. And the first year he's there, we believe the pro forma rent's going to be about $400,000. But what also happens at that point is that now you have all the bed tax money, you have property tax money, all those things which come directly to the beach. Its first year, we get $4.8 million. The first year it comes in, and then it moves up a few years later in 2021, it's $10 million, and then it moves up to $12 million. And all that, let me finish, please. All that money is going to education enhancements, flood mitigation, and traffic mitigation.
Contingent upon his occupancy?
Yeah, but these are conservative. These aren't filled occupants. The rent's not, by the way. There's a base rent that's there. So
but those numbers,
and by the way, not a dollar.
And
this is what has really bothered me, Kristen, about the opponents. It's easy to demagogue issues, and Miami Beach has a great tradition of demagoguery and anonymous mailers and robocalls. But at the end of the day, people need to know what the constraints of this deal. If you want to change your opinion on it, you have a right, but you don't have a right to change the facts. This is not a deal that's going to cost Miami voters a single dollar.
I think we've established that.
Well, I don't know. I
think we've established that.
Let's give the commissioner a chance to respond here. I know you have lots to say.
So this $4.8 million, there's the assumption that this is in some way going to benefit the residents of Miami Beach, but in reality, it's really going to benefit tourism because a lot of those dollars are committed and allocated to tourism and capital improvements projects within the Convention Center Lincoln Road District. I don't see how that's going to benefit me or you. I think it's the $400,000 that's going to be allocated over 4 pots into education, and if you look at our budget, it's really insignificant. And the deal is very, very backloaded. We're not going to be able to see these large payments toward toward flooding and education until maybe 70 years old. So maybe your daughter, who's now 10, Dan, will begin to benefit when she's 80 from some of these improvements in this 99-year lease.
She's 17 and
15. So she'll
she
be,
may act a lot
87
older.
by then.
Commissioner, if I can, one of the, I think, the serious and legitimate criticisms of the hotel is it's on 2.5 acres, but it is 28 stories high, 800 rooms. As a friend of mine in the hotel business has pointed out, it is the same width as the Fontainebleau and twice as high on a much smaller lot.
Let me explain. First of all, there are 19 buildings bigger and taller than this one.
But not in the middle of the beach.
The Satai, 2 blocks east of it, is taller. Okay, so that's, so let's be, I mean, people have spread so much things about this. There are 19 buildings in Little Miami Beach bigger than this building. The reason why they made it tall and thin had to be enough to at least take care of the convention center needs. So 800 rooms is about right. By the way, the Fondley's more than twice as big in terms of rooms. So it's not this you know, huge thing that's going to dominate. The reason it's on 2 acres, and it is a small and tall and thin building. The reason it's like that is for very simple reasons. We needed to have a hotel next to the convention center, and this project is going to create in that entire parking lot a 6-acre park, a sculpted park that I think the Miami Beach residents are going to love. And when you supported it, by the way, the template of this project was set. There was nothing changed. The reason they did this was because the folks who were putting the project together said, you know, we don't want to give away city land, and they're not. We don't want to give control to a lot of it to a developer, and they're not. We want to give them a small area, let them build up so it doesn't eliminate the vistas. It's on a street that's abutted by art centers and the government center, so it's not near residents. And it's going to reduce probably 2,000 to 3,000 cars a day coming into the beach once it becomes a conference and convention center.
You just don't believe that's the case, right?
Before I got elected, I didn't realize how desperate the residents of Miami Beach were in terms of traffic. I get calls and emails all day long from residents who are who don't know what to do anymore. and I don't think that putting this 800-room hotel on 17th Street, which is way too narrow, is the answer. And now that I understand better, and also this developer is actually going to be competing with the convention center, because now that I've started studying the deal and looking at it more, there's 100,000 square feet of convention center space within this hotel. So it's going to be 2 convention centers competing at the same time, and this isn't supposed to cause any traffic?
On the ballot on March 15th, the vote has to reach 60% for this to be a positive vote. In other words, it's when it's
right.
Just
it's a very high threshold.
High threshold, and there might be half or more of the voters who say yes, but it won't meet the 60%. So what happens, my question is, what happens, and maybe this goes to one of the commissioners who are supporting this, who aren't here to talk about that, but what happens if it fails the 60%, and this deal, which sounds like it has a very positive spin for in a lot of ways, does not get done? Is there a chance that the commissioners will say, look, we have a 50% majority, we couldn't do it we're going to do it this way, and maybe it'll be something that will cost the residents of Miami Beach? Is that possible?
Not only is it possible, other convention centers, by the way, across the country that aren't in Tier 1 communities like Miami Beach, their cities pay for the hotel. They give out $30, $40, $50 million, and you hear these stories about that.
And some of them are tanking.
And some of them because obviously the market wouldn't support it. It's a loss leader for the city. We have a developer who's willing to shell out $400 million to build on this very small plot of land. Give us money, by the way. Make a $300,000 revenue generation into a huge amount of money for education, for flood mitigation, and for traffic mitigation. All that is going to happen, and we're going to have a beautiful park. And by the way,
in about 10 seconds, Kristen, if you want to respond.
We're Miami Beach. We'll be able to attract other developers. We'll structure a better deal, maybe place the hotel in a better place. We'll get more than one bidder. For this deal, we only had one bidder. Hopefully, we'll bid it out. In 2013, we had Rem Koolhaus and Bjork A. Ingels, Starkitects. This time, we have a no-name architect designing the building. Miami Beach, we can do this better. And I know on March 15th, you're going to make the right choice and vote no.
That is going to be the final word pro, the final word con. Thank you both for coming in. Great discussion.
Absolutely.
Love it when you're a contrarian.
I thought.
Well then, after the break, we are taking this all to the Powerhouse Roundtable. Please do stick around. Before we get to the roundtable, some breaking news, sad news to tell you about right now. Former First Lady Nancy Reagan has died. The former First Lady was living in Bel Air. You may know she's been in ill health in recent years. That's certainly been documented. And this morning, her family is confirming to several news outlets that she has passed away.
And that was video of former Florida or current Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who was invited by Nancy Reagan to speak at the Reagan Library about, 4 years ago. And she stumbled a little bit as they entered. He caught her. It was a nice moment. And he was, well, like many people in public life, was close to her. So we mourn the passing today of Nancy Reagan.
Yes. So this week we had a Super Tuesday, we had a semi-Super Saturday, we had a debate that was R-rated, and renewed scrutiny of the president's upcoming trip to Cuba.
So let's take it all to the round table. We have got a good one for you today. Justin Safey is a Fort Lauderdale attorney. His website he created, the Safey Review, is the go-to source for political news for people like us. He was once communications director for Governor Jeb Bush.
Welcome back to Marlon Hill, an attorney with the Hamilton, Miller, and Berthasell law firm. He also hosts a radio talk program.
And also glad to welcome back the one and only Patricia Mazzei, Patty Mazzei, lead political reporter for the Miami Herald. She has been on the road covering all the candidates in the campaigns. Good to see you, Patty. Glad you're
We
here.
waved at a Bernie Sanders event in some city.
I yelled
Where were
across
we?
the press gaggle, Glenna!
We've had some fun. It's been a really interesting campaign.
Patty, let's begin with you and on, I think, the one of the most amazing weeks in presidential politics that I can remember, where the former standard bearer for one party, in this case Mitt Romney, takes out and delivers a scathing attack on the current standard bearer, Donald Trump. I mean, nothing like this I can remember at all, except maybe if you go back to Barry Goldwater in 1964 and Nelson Rockefeller. You weren't even alive then, but let me tell you.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but yes.
No, but I mean, your thoughts when you heard
I mean, it was
Romney.
unprecedented. I mean, here is the party's former nominee basically taking down the party's presumptive next nominee, and then he gets joined by the previous nominee, John McCain, who issued a statement basically saying, I agree with Mitt Romney. And it's unheard of, and yet the response from Trump at that debate and at his rally that day was very Trumpian, which is now a new adjective we have all
Is that a
had
hashtag?
to adopt. Which he didn't really respond on the facts or on the substance of the attack.
Right.
He
Well, he even called
just
it
basically
irrelevant.
said, right, this guy is a loser, which is a classic kind of Trump put
Trumpian.
down of someone who begged for my endorsement 4 years ago and who would have dropped to his knees to do whatever I would have said to do.
We
Cue the
have
tape.
that soundbite, I think, queued up, and if we do, just let's roll it, and folks at home can listen to it if you somehow missed it.
Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His promises are as worthless as a degree from Trump University. He's playing the members of the American public for suckers. He gets a free ride to the White House, and all we get is a lousy hat.
Mitt is a failed candidate. He failed. He failed horribly. He was begging for my endorsement. I could have said, Mitt, drop to your knees. He would have dropped to his knees.
No. Justin, why Mitt Romney? Because I will tell you, I had a chance to cover the night he lost. We were in Boston, and he clearly said, this is the end of my political career, acted on that. Why him, and is that effective?
Well, I don't think it was effective. I think Donald Trump is catching fire and is catching momentum in the Republican Party because he's not part of the establishment. He's not one of the inside players. And every time someone from the establishment attacks Donald Trump, it plays right into the reason why Republican voters are supporting him. And it's the same thing with Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side. Hillary Clinton is the establishment candidate over there. There's something going on in American politics right now. So I don't think that the Romney attack is going to be effective. I really don't.
Not even as effective as a KKK non-denial. But that's, and you know what's interesting? Can I just take that over to the Marco Rubio campaign for a moment? As we slide into the Florida campaign, Marco Rubio has been racking up endorsement after endorsement of all of the party leaders in the establishment. And on any given year, that would make a voter say, wow, you know, let's take another look at Marco Rubio. But this year, Marlon, that's almost not such a good thing.
No, and he's not even getting any endorsements from the current governor or a former governor, our good friend Jeb Bush, Justin. So that's very interesting to me as well. But now with the passing of Nancy Reagan, maybe we've seen the footage there with him, with Nancy Reagan. He may be able to use that as some emotional uplift because he must win Florida, has to win Florida.
Well, and Patty Mazzei, I mean, that is really the crucial question now for Marco Rubio. How he can't really go forward, can he, if he doesn't win Florida March 15th and the 99 delegates, winner take all?
And he's basically guaranteed a victory because I think they know that you can't, in general, you can't lose your home state. I mean, in a primary. That's just,
Guaranteed by whom?
He has said we will win Florida. I mean, in no uncertain terms, period, full stop, we will win. So that, you know, sets the stakes. So that, I mean, if he doesn't win, I think we all know that there's really no way to move forward. And the flip side of that is if Trump wins Florida and Ohio, or Florida or Ohio, he's really going to be, you know, almost uncatchable at that point.
Well, and there is, Justin, I think a fascinating kind of sidelight here because he is just superb at catching all the media, free media. Donald Trump has not really spent any money on ads, but I saw on Friday he is spending $2 million on TV time in Florida because he is determined to beat Marco Rubio.
Right. I mean, as Patty said, if Marco Rubio loses Florida, that's probably going to be the end of his campaign. It's hard to see how he goes forward because he's only won one state so far. Ted Cruz is winning states. Marco Rubio hasn't won as many. And Florida is winner take all for the delegates. 99 delegates to become the nominee of the Republican Party. Right. Whoever wins Florida, second place gets you no delegates whatsoever. So number one means enough to Donald Trump. He's willing to spend money, which he hasn't done in other states.
The last turnout was 41% in the last presidential preference primary. The energy right now is with the Trumpians, as you want to say, Patty. They have the energy in regards to folks coming out and supporting him. So it's going to be very tough for Rubio to win Florida, in my opinion. Kasich may hold on to Ohio, I believe.
He's brought in a lot of people to the Republican Party. There's no doubt about that.
Well, what's interesting is you can't really measure if it's the pro-Trump or also the anti-Trump that are kind of both driving this high turnout on the Republican side. And looking down to the general election, the Democrats might have an issue there. I mean, will Hillary Clinton, if she's the nominee, be able to drive out the high turnout she might need against unusual candidate who could draw independents and Democrats?
Right.
Yeah.
Also, I saw our friend Ana Navarro, wonderful Miamian who is a commentator on CNN and was on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. She pointed out about an hour ago that Ted Cruz is opening 10 campaign offices in Florida, or has opened them, and he doesn't expect to win, but he is also determined to deny Marco Rubio the victory.
Yeah, and that could be an effective strategy for Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz has done very well in other states. He's beaten Donald Trump, or he's come in second place. There's an element of the Republican Party that is with Ted Cruz, and that's going to make it much more difficult for Rubio to win the state.
Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah,
sort
you can.
of, kind of?
Absolutely.
As a former
That's why I'm here.
communications director for Jeb Bush, does he plan an endorsement? Does he plan anything?
You know, I think we're going to have to wait and see what he decides to do. Obviously, Governor Bush and Marco Rubio said during the campaign, even though it got tough at times, they both have a lot of mutual respect for each other. They both consider themselves friends. You know, it's personal when you lose a presidential campaign. He's going to have to make that decision, and if he does, I'm sure we'll be hearing about it in the next few days.
It was so
or
diplomatic.
And even if an endorsement could
Nice try.
That was nicely done, Justin. That was pretty slick. And speaking of endorsements, Patty, we saw 3 weeks ago, Governor Rick Scott wrote a glowing op-ed in USA Today about Donald Trump, saying a great businessman can be a great government leader. Hey, look at me, was the implied message there. But he has decided, Scott has decided, he's not going to endorse before the primary. Why is that?
Well, he said that it's because he remembers kind of what it feels like to, I mean, he didn't put in as many words, but he remembers to be the outsider coming in and having kind of the political establishment lined up against you. And that he trusts the voters was what he said on his Facebook post announcing this, and that he is sure they will make the right decision. Like you said, he already kind of told people where he is with that USA Today column. But we really haven't seen governor endorsements help much in this campaign. I mean, Rubio had the endorsement of the Kansas governor. He came in third. Trump had the endorsement of the Maine governor. He came in second. So really, is this the year where endorsements matter? You know, this might be the time where we realize that super PAC money doesn't win you campaigns, and neither do endorsements.
Down is up and up is down. Quick break and we come right back. Stay with us.
We'll be back. We are glad to have you with us live in our studio this morning, members of our Rockin' Roundtable. Can I say that? Justin Safey, Marlene Hill, Patty Mazzei from the Miami Herald. Patty, Hillary Clinton won a very easy victory in the primary yesterday, Louisiana. But Bernie Sanders, who raised $40 million in February, so he'll keep going, he won Nebraska and Kansas. She's way ahead in the delegate count, but I mean, this is going to go on, isn't it?
It looks like it is. I mean, I think if he doesn't win and win by large margins, the delegate situation is just going to get wider. And so, and this is always what we grapple with, trying to explain this complicated system to people who say, well, but he's winning. I don't understand why you guys aren't saying that he's, you know, ahead. And it's like, well, because the delegates are just, I mean, and she just won Louisiana last night, and yet she got a huge number of delegates out of it because of that huge margin.
Right. Well, she has, for what it's worth, 1,114 delegates. He has 469. She is going to have enough delegates by the time they get to the convention, Marlene. I mean, it appears almost inevitable she'll be the nominee.
The tea leaves are in the superdelegates, right? So they include the superdelegates in her number, and that supersizes her winning streak, and that will hold.
Which I think is interesting, though. So Republican Party, we don't have this massive number of superdelegates. The Democratic Party has this massive number of superdelegates, and these are delegates that are awarded not based on the vote of the people. These are party establishment type people that have the chance to swing the nomination one way or another. So I think it's really remarkable that the Democratic Party has this somewhat anti-democratic method of picking their nominee with this massive amount of establishment-based delegates that can swing the nomination. And if I were a Bernie Sanders supporter in the Democratic Party, I'd be very frustrated with the nomination process.
Well, if he started to win, I mean, they could move. Those superdelegates could certainly move to Sanders, though, right? I mean, I think it would be surprising if you had two candidates and one racked up the biggest number of pledged delegates and regular delegates, and then the superdelegates were like, oh, we're not letting this happen, right? That would certainly be anti-democratic.
They could. There's nothing that binds them to vote for Bernie Sanders if he were to start winning more delegates.
You know what's so interesting is who's voting for Bernie Sanders. He's getting these numbers based on largely people of not color, white people, and young people. And
I think that's a miss, though, Glenna.
In the state so far, we're looking at the demographics, and even where he loses, he wins in those categories.
Yeah, but you know, there's a revolution happening on both sides in the party in America right now with regards to folks not happy with the institutional establishment per se. So I think we're going to continue to see that. And America is a much different multicultural place than we were in previous elections.
It sure
is. Of course, which is why it's so unusual to see numbers like that.
Sure.
All right, well, if we can, let's kind of move the conversation on to President Obama and Cuba. Just in this week, we all saw that Secretary of State John Kerry canceled a trip this upcoming week to Cuba, and I had it from some very good sources. The reason he did is because the Cuban government refused to say President Obama, when he comes, can speak to this dissident, that dissident. And Kerry said, I'm not going in. And then they papered it over and it got spun. But this remains, and today's Miami Herald, in fact, has a very strong editorial that says if Mr. Obama can't speak to the dissidents he wants to speak to, he shouldn't go.
Michael, I'm very passionate about this issue. And I feel that President Obama cannot allow himself to be used as a propaganda tool of the Cuban government. I understand he wants to have a legacy trip to go to Cuba, and he really, I feel, is too desperate to go to Cuba. He cannot go to Cuba if he doesn't meet with the head of the Ladies in White. He cannot go to Cuba if he doesn't meet with the dissidents that he chooses to. It will make his Nobel Peace Prize that he won worthless. To have a Nobel Peace Prize winner, the President of the United States, be dictated to by the Cuban government, who he is allowed to meet with on a trip, it sends a horrible message to the dissidents in Cuba, and not to mention the human rights advocates in China, in Iran, in North Korea, around the world. The United States needs to stand for freedom, and the American president should not go there if he can't meet with who he wants to meet with.
Hasn't that already, Marlon, been compromised? Because since December 2014, when the new rules were put in place, and the biggest argument that you hear against President Obama is that he got nothing in return. The U.S. got nothing in return. And now, since January, 1,400 plus dissidents have been arrested, you know, some very temporarily, but still, there are no human rights move the needle type of motions going on.
This calculated diplomatic risk, you know, the cat is already out the bag. You know, so Justin is right. The president will have to pay very close attention as to whether he would dictate this itinerary coming up in a couple of weeks before Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday is March 27th. He will need to pay very close attention as to who he's going to meet to. He has to demonstrate that repression needs to stop, first of all, in Cuba, right? And he needs to be able to speak to as many levels of dissidents, not just the ladies in white, but there are different
well, there are many.
sectors
I was
as well.
talking to my friend Andy Gomez, former University of Miami professor, and I was saying, well, I had recently spoken to Berta Soler, head of the Ladies in White, Antonio Rodiles, who was another very brave dissident, and I said, who else do you think he could speak to? And Andy said in an email, oh, there may be 11 million repressed people that he wants to speak to. So, but the question, Patty, really becomes in some ways, does Mr. Obama speak to them privately, in a public setting, in a large group with other intellectuals and thought leaders in Cuba that the government wants? I mean, all these questions are open.
Well, and that was part of the issue when Kerry went over there to open the embassy, that, you know, that he met with some of them privately and whether that was enough. The White House pushed back on Friday and said, no, of course the president will meet with whoever he wants. But by this point, the story of Kerry not traveling in advance to Cuba was a problem. And you heard them say Friday night, we reported this, that they're sending the Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, who was one of the architects of this deal, to Miami to talk to Cuban American leaders. And it's like, well, I'm sure they're happy to sit down with him, but they were left out of the process leading up to December 2014. And those bruises are
just going to
hard
speak
to
to
heal.
Carlos Saladrigas and Mike Fernandez, and which leaders is Ben Rhodes going to speak to?
Right. I mean, they have a bit of a public relations situation.
Who's going to determine the itinerary for that trip?
Too many itineraries to keep track of now.
All right, if we can, before we run out of time, the state legislature, which is ending its session, thank goodness, had a couple of things they had to do, and one of them, Marlon, you're the attorney in the group, well, so is Justin, but they had to deal with the state death penalty statute, which the Supreme Court said was unconstitutional because judges, not juries, were deciding. But then it got to be a question, and they fixed that, of, well, does it have to be a unanimous jury on a conviction on a death penalty conviction? And now the legislature says, okay, 10-2 is good enough.
Absolutely. Well, no majority anymore. It says 10 out of 12.
But we're one of 3 states, are we not, that allows less than a unanimous death penalty verdict?
Absolutely. So I think it's good in terms of folks having the opportunity in a jury to decide. It really takes a very big decision for any of your peers to make a decision like that. So I think 10 out of 12 seems reasonable to me. I think people would agree with that.
Okay.
I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, did you read the statute? I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but there is a component where the aggravating factors, the reason why the jurors are deciding death, have to be enumerated more clearly? Is that accurate?
Well, yeah, it's under the U.S. Constitution. You know, there's a certain standard by which the U.S. Supreme Court has said there must be met to condemn somebody to death. So the Florida legislature in this fix expanded really expanded the ability of juries to condemn someone to death. They said they only have to have one aggravating factor that they have to find, whereas before it was a little bit more limited. Yeah. So that apparently is going to result in the death penalty. Opponents are probably going to challenge this bill. Governor Scott's expected to sign it.
Well, we should note the Senate tried to make it unanimous.
Right.
And Republicans in the Senate tried to make it unanimous as well. And they didn't go for it because they thought the House was going to turn them down. And of course, the counter argument was, well, if they turn them down, then we have no death penalty. So we should put some pressure on the House. But it didn't end up going anywhere.
Yeah. Final note, if I could, very good piece in today's Herald Tampa Bay Tribune that says Rick Scott isn't getting bupkis from the legislature. I mean, he wanted 200.
Does it say bupkis?
Yeah, I can say bupkis. I know a little Yiddish.
Does the editorial say bupkis? That's for you.
Anyway, he's not getting $250 million to develop, bring business here, not getting a $1 billion tax cut, and the legislature might even override line item vetoes.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, look, when you're a governor, and I've worked for Governor Bush, in your second term, at some point you start to lose some of your influence with the legislature. Governor Scott is still only in the second year of his second 4-year term. He still has 3 more years to go. Yeah. So it does appear that it's that the legislature is kind of pushing back on some of his top initiatives.
We'll have a lot to talk about next week. All right, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank
Great
you
as
all.
always. And stay with us. We'll be back in 2.
And on this Sunday, we have some breaking news, sad news to tell you about right now. Former First Lady Nancy Reagan has died in California.
The former First Lady was living in Bel Air. As you may know, she has been in failing health recently. During the White House years, she is best known for sponsoring major drug prevention crusade aimed at children and young adults. You know, Just Say No, that was Nancy Reagan's campaign, Just Say No. And the video you're looking at right here is
we believe this is, I think, from 2012, shortly after he was elected to the U.S. Senate. Florida Senator Marco Rubio was invited to the Reagan Library to deliver a speech, quite an honor, and he was accompanied Nancy Reagan into that event. It was a picture which I'm sure we will see over and over today, and but it was a gracious moment. It was a very nice moment. Glenna, I used to like to see the pictures of Nancy and Ronald Reagan standing next to each other. Here they are with Ann and Mitt Romney, or she is with Ann and Mitt Romney. But when she would look at her husband, it wasn't rehearsed. It was a genuine moment of love. They really had one of the great love affairs of people in public life.
I think it's safe to say she will be an American icon. Nancy Reagan, rest in peace.
Yeah.
Passed away at 94.
All right, still to come, the price and pain of suffering. The state of Florida is complicit, Glenna thinks, but it will not compensate one of the state's most high-profile victims in the crimes against children.
Florida lawmakers wrapping up session this week have failed again. A now 15-year-old boy who lived a life of horrific abuse due to state negligence. You likely recognize the name, Victor Barahona. The state agreed to compensate him $5 million, an amount that needs lawmakers to lift a legal cap for most of that payment. For a second year now, they did not. Valentine's Day 5 years ago, the discovery of twins awash in chemicals in their father's truck, Victor convulsing, his sister Nubia was dead. That led to the backstory of their lifelong nightmare. They were 4 when the Department of Children and Families allowed George and Carmen Barahona to foster them and then adopt them. And over the course of 6 years, the twins endured physical and mental abuse, some described as torture, that went all but ignored by DCF.
And the department, time and time again, ignored phone calls from concerned neighbors that heard the screams of the children from the beatings, concerned teachers.
During that state committee process, lawmakers learned about significant red flags, all ignored by the state social workers who could have saved the twins. DCF's then secretary fully admitted the failures. So why won't the state release the money meant to compensate Victor, if that's even possible? His and others' claims bills are held up in the House over concerns of the lawyers' fees involved, a significant amount, as lawyers' fees can be. But arguably, without legal pressing, those harmed by the state would likely be all but ignored again. So that process may need changing, but that is not a reason for the state to turn its back again on a boy whose suffering it helped cause. So what do you think? We invite you to weigh in on any topic you like.
And we hope you can find us and reach out to us here on email, Facebook, Twitter. Any of these addresses, we're easy to find. And guess what? We do respond. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved, have a beautiful Sunday.
And if you're around Coral Gables, we'll be at Miracle on the Mile today, so come out and say hello.
We'll see you then.